right, we're talking about the topics in Chapter 1 today, and I have a couple of key slides I want to look at in here. In fact, probably more than a couple, it's more like a couple dozen. And I am having some video projection issues. I'm getting some flashing, so hopefully it does not affect the video. I'm going to start with this slide right here, which is talking about a grocery store chain called Kroger. Have you guys ever heard of Kroger? Do you know where they originate from? Yeah, most people don't know that. I think, say that again? You know, I don't think so. I think they originated in Ohio, and that's where their like home base of operation is. And the reason I'm bringing up Kroger is Kroger is one of these like giant food store conglomerates. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but they have this habit of like when another company is like getting prominent, they step in and buy them out. Yeah, right. And I don't think a lot of people know that Pick and Save is no longer locally owned. I mean, if you were a private investor, perhaps, but it's not a Wisconsin company anymore. Doesn't mean that we're going to stop shopping there, probably, but it has changed their products. And Kroger's got a much different way of doing business than Pick and Save. And one thing that I just discovered by shopping there, right? So often when I go shopping, I'm like, well, you know what? I need to hit the ATM for some cash. You know, I'll just do it at the checkout. You know, use my pen, get some cash, and they don't charge you anything because you're buying something. Guess what? That's not Kroger's policy. There's a reason why those Rice Krispies are only $1.99, and that's because now they're charging you for your ATM transactions. And the moment I saw that, I'm like, oh no, I'm not doing that. My credit union's right up the street. I just thought I'd save a step. And so I think that's kind of interesting. But Kroger is a company that does use a significant amount of IT to do predictive analysis for what their customers want, need, or they think they need. And I throw that in as think they need as kind of a qualifier. Because I don't always think that sometimes that IT leads you to the right answer. It leads you to a answer that numerically works out maybe to be the most logical, but doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best choice for the company. So that's why I bring up the ATM thing. So for me, wanting to get a couple dollars in cash, now it's like, well, I just need to get milk and eggs. You know, I'm going to go to Whole Foods instead because I can get the cash, and they're not going to charge me for it, and the price is the same. And I think that's really kind of a fascinating thing that they did. What kind of market research did they do to do that? So really, what are they trying to do? They're trying to discourage people from getting cash from them. You know, are they really making that much money off of those transactions? They must be. But those transactions, anytime they do it, you know, with debit, MasterCard, or Visa, there's a transaction fee that the company pays, even if you're not paying it. And so that they're trying to recoup that. So to me, that says that their profit margins are intentionally low. But grocery stores go in, and their general rule of thumb in that industry is a gross profit on anything that they sell. If they can get 5% return on the dollar, that's a win. That's not how most businesses operate. There's other industries that have significantly higher rates of return. Their markup from cost might be higher. So for example, if they buy a Coke for $1, they'll sell it to you. Usually the food industry standard is a 33% markup. So most companies will like 30 or 40. So they buy for $1, sell for $1.30, $1.35, $1.39, right? And then their other expenses eat up the profit, so maybe they're only making like 3 or 4 cents, 5 cents on that soda. But you have to turn a profit to stay in business. And they use profits as really kind of the driving force. So I always, you know, think about those things when I'm shopping and how it impacts the prices of the things that we buy. One thing that they have done, and Pick and Save, I don't know if they were doing this before they got bought out, but they started putting in all those self-checkouts. I thought so too. But I'm noticing now that a lot of the locations that didn't have them are now phasing them in. And in some cases, they put them on both sides of the store now instead of just on the one side because they always have double entrances. Now, do you guys like to use those or not?
I like them to be available where they don't like about Pick and Save because they're trying to force you to use it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I think that's a very astute observation because that's exactly where I was going, Joe.
Yeah.
They want to face up issues.
Yeah, as
Yeah.
much as possible, and if I only have a few things and I'm in a hurry, yes, but I don't have to go through with a whole cart full of stuff.
You just go to the liquor checkout. I think most big states have that. You always have to have your cashier there.
Yeah, because somebody's got to monitor things, right? Where's your ID? You know what? That's one of my strategies too. But in our neighborhood, I'm like, yeah, look, no line at liquor, let's go.
But that's also one of the reasons I believe we can save, because if I'm gonna have to do my own bagging, my own checkout, I'm gonna go to Aldi's where I get, significantly cheaper.
Yeah.
If Pick and Save prices are higher, which I don't mind if I get the service, but I'm not getting the service when I have to check myself out.
Yeah, I think,
They're trying to drop the service, making their prices the same.
Right.
yeah. Well, it's all in the name of making profit, right? So we have that driving motive again. I think what's also fascinating is that there's, some other transitions that are happening here. There are technologies already in the queue, and there's a couple of big players involved in this, and they've been working on it actually for decades. Home Depot, I know, is one of the proponents. Target has been working on this too, but they're trying to move to an era where every single product in their store has, one of those RFID tags on it. You guys know what RFID stands for? Okay, it stands for radio frequency ID. And basically, it's a piece of technology that's electronic, but it's what we call passive electronic. It does not have a power source. You don't plug it in, no battery or anything like that. You don't connect it to USB. It's a circuit that, when it comes in contact with certain radio frequencies, will activate the device, and then you can read the data from the device. So if you go to like the Gap, for example, buy a pair of jeans, most of your clothes when you go to like high-end retailers have RFID tags on them, right? And the goal of that is when you go to check out, why do they wait over the demagnetize everything? They want to like erase that so you can walk to the security system. So the original uses, which was mostly to prevent people from stealing things. But now it's transitioning to the point where Home Depot and Target have had this vision for a long time, and I'm waiting to see it come to fruition, where you can just go to the store, throw stuff in your cart, and walk out the door. Yeah. And so it's all driven off that technology. Some companies have used that technology also, like Walmart uses RFID when they do their distribution to stores. So they load up their trucks, they palletize everything, shrink wrap it. Every pallet's got an ID, and they put these stickers and stuff on it. Little do you know, they have an RFID chip on there. The moment it crosses the threshold at the store, instantly into the inventory system. So what's the advantage there? You just put somebody out of a job, right, or a couple, 2, 3 people out of a job. However, there's no errors being made. That one Xbox is not disappearing off the pallet like it was in the past. So, companies like this do that type of thing with a significant intent. So let's talk about kind of like the grand goal of this chapter, which is this. This is kind of the topic. And how we are transforming, and notice the focus is on business, right? The truth is, it really is transforming society, but business often will embrace things in the name of profit first. And notice some of the things that they put on here, right? So a mobile digital platform. And what do you think the relationship is with that? Why are they putting that there? And what do you mean by platform? Something to stand on? A platform has a very specific implication in information systems. Usually when we think of like IT, we think of the hardware and we think of the software. And when we think of the software, we think of the applications, so like my browser, my Word, my Instagram app, or whatever. But a platform implies an interconnected series of a bunch of different apps working together. And every big IT company, Google wants you on their platform. They don't want you just, posting pictures of your lunch and, fishing for likes. They want you to communicate. They want you to shop there, right? You guys ever check out the Google or the Facebook Marketplace, for example? And it's actually pretty successful. I've known people that are switching to it, like abandoning Craigslist and going to the marketplace because they get, you know, every time somebody looks at their thing, they get a notification. That's way better than Craigslist, right? So I think that's pretty interesting. And they have a couple of other things here too, but let's move on to the next slide. They look at also kind of like the total investment in technology over time. And, you know, this stops at 2015. We can very easily extrapolate that it's on an ever increasing trajectory, and that's absolutely true. We look at a room like this, where we have 24 workstations with dual screens, and I'm just guesstimating these are probably in the neighborhood of like a $1,500 computer that we have sitting in front of you. So just with those machines times 24 is what? Throw in these displays. These are all 4K displays. I know this is a really expensive one. Thank you, Foxconn, who gave it to us for free, by the way. And then in the next room there, I got some servers. I only have one of them fired up right now, but I got 4 more. Each one of those costs us $25,000 for each computer system. So just in this room alone, we're looking at probably a couple $100,000 worth of technology. And here I have 3 students. Now you have to thank the taxpayers of our 3-county district, because they're really the ones paying for it, so it's not just your tuition. But it's also a good reason to go to technical college, because your tax dollars are at work, so you may as well take advantage of it. That's my thinking. All right, let's move on. So they're talking about what's new in information systems. So some keywords out there. Really big catchphrase these days: cloud computing. What the heck is cloud computing? I don't know, there's cloud, and you got laptop, Wi-Fi, and they're doing their homework, you know. Well, cloud computing is really kind of this paradigm where we are starting to take things and move them away from physical machines. So when I have servers sitting in a room like that, we call that on-premise. Those computers are on this premise, and whatever I'm connecting to, whether it's a file or an application or a database, it's on that machine. I see the machine. I have this conception that even though it's traveling through the network to connect, it's right there, right? Cloud computing takes things off-premise, virtualizes them, and that's a whole separate concept we're going to learn about too, and then deploys it to another server, so in other words, a machine that's responsible for running many other machines. And actually, we run our server that way too. So our server is set up to run a host operating system, which then runs other operating systems. And then the mind bender is you take those other operating systems and have them run other operating systems. So we're doing this like inception thing, the dream within the dream within the dream. You're not even interacting with a real computer system, you're interacting with a virtual construct. Mind-blowing. That's what the cloud is. So when you see things for Azure or AWS, right? Amazon's big money maker, not retail. AWS is the big money maker. Yeah, that's Skynet. Everything is virtualized. And in fact, you can go into AWS, and I hope to demonstrate this for you later in the semester, and you can deploy a server with almost no cost. Set up an account, you log in. I want to run a Linux server, I want to run a Windows server, I want a database on it. Click, 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 it's created. Then I can just pay for it. If I was the NFL and I have my servers virtualized, which they do, by the way, and they do run on AWS, there's no coincidence that you see all the AWS stuff on the NFL games. What they're doing is they run whatever they do on the NFL website. Oh my God, it's the playoffs. The traffic spikes. You know, and the classic thing that would happen in the old days is the machine can't handle the traffic, so it crashes. But now dynamically, because it's in the cloud, they can just say, well, we have it assigned to a couple virtual machines. Why don't we expand that to 20? Because if we're going to spike that much in traffic, let's give it more CPUs, more RAM, more bandwidth. And then when the Super Bowl's done, we can just drop it back on to normal, nobody will know. And that's the beauty of the cloud. So that's a real big one. And I'm sorry, I maybe focused on that a little bit too much, but I'm going to move on to a different slide now. And I have notes here that I'm working from, so if you guys are wondering. So I'm going down to slide number 23. And let's talk about kind of the crux of the course. What is an information system? And I think I mentioned last time, I talked about the difference between data and information, and I think maybe even the next slide kind of demonstrates that. But an information system is not reliant on technology, folks. We had information before we had computers. We wrote it down, we carved it onto cave walls, whatever we had to do to store things. And we've had societies here on planet Earth that have been doing it for a long time. So like the Romans, for example, were very prolific record keepers. We know almost everything they did. They saved it. And not only that, but they were smart enough to make copies of it too. And even though the barbarians came in and sacked Rome and burned the place to the ground and destroyed everything, well, little did they know that there were copies of all the records that were stored in the libraries in Alexandria and Babylon. And after the Dark Ages, we ended up pulling all that information back from the backups of ancient society, which I think is fascinating, which actually led to the Age of Enlightenment when you start to look at it. But the information is the important piece. And how we work with the information is part of the system. And there is a whole systems concept that applies to this field. And you're going to see this thread that happens with IT. And, so this is an interesting slide. He used to use a different slide to get this across, which I think was a little bit better. But the concept of on the left, we have a bunch of raw data. You look at it, it means, you can kind of figure out what it means. But when you organize it, you label it, you sort it, then you start to give meaning to it, and that's when it really becomes information. Otherwise, it's just raw data. And I think that's a very important distinction in this field. All right. So whenever you're working with information, and especially in an organization, and we usually look at it from a business perspective, information has a flow to it and a process. So you come here to Gateway and you sign up for classes, right? It's like, we got to pay a fee, we got to fill out this form, this form, and this form, and this form, right? And then, even though we do it online, we still are gathering information, and then there's a process. So if you want to be a student in this program, you have to talk to an advisor, declare your major, do some paperwork, and then you're, hopefully when you finish all your classes, you get your degree. But it's all part of the process. And if you don't follow the process, it doesn't work, right? Or you don't get the desired result. So they talk about these three central things. So it says 3 activities of information systems. But I'm going to extend this a little bit further. This systems approach really extends to a lot of different things. Computer science has kind of latched onto it as kind of like their mantra. And if you think about just those 3 words, input, processing, and output, and we're going to talk about hardware too, but those are kind of tenets of how our computers work, right? So I have inputs and outputs, so keyboard, mouse, screen, printer, and we have like a CPU, the processing, something that's happening inside the box that makes it all go. And then we can extend that concept even further. So like, for example, if I was running a factory, and my job is to create paper, right? Well, I start with raw materials. That's my input. So I go down and chop down a bunch of trees, put them on trucks, bring them to the factory, grind them all down, mulch them up, turn them into a pulp or whatever, run them through a couple of machines, and out comes 8.5 by 11 paper. Beautiful, right? Put it in a printer and we print. The input is the raw material. The process is whatever we do to it to create the object, and then we're outputting the paper. So you see that in the physical world as well. In a computer system, so they show this little slide here. See this little theme. Now, Jill, you've been in our development programs here, so you know how to code, at least on some level, right? Yeah. And I don't know if you ever taught this in any of your coding classes, but when you do planning to write a program, you often look at, okay, what are you trying to do? Right? And so, all right, well, what inputs do you have? What information are you pulling in? Are you getting it from the user? Are you feeding in a file? Somebody typing it in? And then we have some process. We either do math, or we sort, or we organize, or ask a bunch of questions and make selections. And then ultimately we want some output. The output might just be you know, a little dancing figure on the screen, or it might be correctly calculated math or a plane ticket that you can fly somewhere with. And that paradigm extends. And if you think really carefully about all the things you encounter in IT, most of them are based upon this ridiculously simple model. I don't know why it's latched on so hard, but if you look for the pattern, you will see it in everything IT. And I'm hoping you do. The benefits of having, you know, what we call a systems approach are that once you have a basis like that, it kind of frees you up to actually do the work that's involved with it. So you have a methodology, now you're just applying whatever it is you're trying to solve to that methodology. So if I have a programming problem for my students, well, we set up a scenario, and then you go through that process. Whether you think about it or not, you are setting up some sort of a flow to what you're doing. So in programming, what we do is oftentimes we start with pseudocode. You don't just start coding, you gotta have some sort of a design. If I'm building a website, which is a little bit more visual, same thing. It's like, what are you building? I don't just start typing HTML. I have a target design I'm shooting for. You know, I might even draw something on a piece of paper or whatever it might be. Extend that concept to a lot of different things, and you see how valid it is, especially anything that involves a process or a flow. And a lot of people will flow chart it out, for example. All right. So they talk about, you know, information systems and how they apply to organizations, and they do this thing in this book where they kind of break down what information systems do relative to certain disciplines in business. And so that's why they say, you know, dimensions of information systems, and they go organizations. So from an organizational perspective, what is it that an information system brings to the table? And as you look at these slides and read the chapter, you see that pattern. And so you can kind of, like, if you were working at the organizational level, you can focus in on that section, or if you're in, I don't know, manufacturing or whatever, or operations, whatever it is, you can look at that particular aspect and focus in. So when we look at it from the standpoint of an organization, I think this is really kind of interesting because they do this whole hierarchy, right? So they list it here, and then they kind of do this little graphic. And this is true in a lot of organizations, right? You have people at the top, then you have your mid-level managers, and then you have people who actually like do the stuff, right? And they call it operational management. But when you guys are learning this data science thing, you really kind of end up in one of these two areas. So we're really training you guys to kind of come in at this level. Data workers, notice, right? And these positions have existed for a long time, and not you. But now we're putting different titles on them because the tools are different, right? In order to work with data now, in the past, you just had to shuffle paper and know how to alphabetize and use a calculator. Now you must know how to program. You have to know how to talk to people. You have a really wide range of skills, so that's where you guys are kind of falling in. So in many cases, when you go on to like graduate studies, you might be learning very much the same types of things, but you're going to find yourself, like if you're following a business track, that they might call it operations management. Right? When I went to school and got my first degree, it was an associate's degree in business mid-management. That was like a thing. I want to be a middle manager. That's my goal in life. Not at all. But I thought it was really fascinating. But you know, notice that like the higher end, smarter people tend to be in that category. It doesn't mean you're necessarily a manager. So, all right, let's move on. Going down to slide. Oh, I already did that one. All right. And I'm going on to slide number 40. Let's take a really quick look at these next couple. And we'll be done with the PowerPoint here. So one of the things that's kind of interesting here is they make this distinction about this concept called the value chain. All right? And why does Gateway put you through a process of filling out forms? Now, I find it really interesting because just recently, this last semester, my son signed up to take a class here at Gateway. Couldn't get him to come back this semester, but we'll work on that. This semester, my wife decided to come and take the classes, right? So I got to watch. I never get to see the process of registration, but with my wife, I went with her, helped her fill out the forms, sign up for the right classes, and just to watch that whole thing. In terms of how Gateway operates, there's certain questions that they ask you, and you get like, why are they asking that question? Does it really matter to them if you're white or Hispanic or whatever? Why do they ask that question? What value does that bring to our organization? Right. It also helps to establish demographics to see who's going to school. And Gateway, if you look at their website and you hunt around, they have very specific demographics of what our population looks like. And if I compare those demographics to, let's say, what happens at MADC in Milwaukee, and then compare it to a technical college up north, or better yet, let's compare it to like Marquette, and look at the demographics. Do you think the demographics will be different, percentage-wise? Well, maybe. Probably not as different as you might think it is.
But it also influences their ad campaigns. If you notice on the Gateway site, they purposely change, male, female, what race of people that are pictured.
Right. Right. So, good example, right? How many of the signs you see around campus are written in Spanish? Probably not too many, but I notice them. Yeah, there are some. And I think it's interesting that if you guys ever get a chance to travel, let's say to California, for example, or Texas, I don't know if you ever have, but if you're in Southern California, you're walking to McDonald's, it's in Spanish, right? Why? Because they know like most other people speak Spanish, and that's not a bad thing. But but I'm still asking the question, how does that add value to the organization otherwise? Is it just about funding? Is it just about grants? I'm trying to get you to think about it on a deeper level. Because yes, they can use it to maybe the federal government will give us more money if we train so many Hispanic people. But maybe it's something deeper than that. Maybe it's just really to gain understanding. We're not judging, my parents came here and didn't speak English. They learned on the fly. And when I think about that, they didn't come when they were kids, so it became natural. They came when they were adults, and that's a much more difficult thing to do. All right. I'm not sure if you guys are latching on to that concept too much, but hopefully as we go. All right. This is kind of an interesting little thing, and it says on the left-hand side, they're looking at productivity relative to industry average, and then IT capital stocks. So what they're saying here is the more that you invest in IT, there is a correlation. So if you study statistics, you guys are doing statistics now, that you'll see that there appears to be a correlation with these data points. And they draw a line on the diagonal to show what the rough correlation is. But generally speaking, the more that you're investing in IT, the higher the productivity or business profits will be. True or false? I don't know. This data seems to indicate that it's true. I can tell you that people can invest a lot of money into technology and have it completely backfire too. So you got to watch that. So how it's applied. And that's why you have such a skew in all the data points. But when you look at data points like this, you're looking for clusters. And the big cluster seems to indicate that there's kind of like an average point in the middle where it seems to be really effective. And then when you go way off the deep end, the results are kind of mixed, putting out maybe a little too much money into it. So if you look far off to the right, it's maybe not as much of a return as you might think it is. Where on the low end of the scale, there's many data points that are above the line. And I think that's a pretty interesting way to look at it. As you guys kind of explore these IT degrees, and I'm looking at the data analytics people here, you're going to start to look at data a little bit different way. And I know that when I started seeing data, and it was really from the statistical standpoint, because I've taught stats many times, that there's these correlations that happen, and that's just one of the keywords that might not be apparent to the general person just looking at the data. So you have to kind of train yourself to rethink of what you're looking at. And then it's all about the framing as well. So I can frame that slide that we just looked at in a different way and argue a completely different point. You guys would probably still be nodding your heads in agreement, even though I'm saying exactly the opposite. So it's all on how you skew things and how you frame it. The one thing that I do like to pull in here, and I like this graphic, it's a little cheesy, but they're kind of pointing out here that when you're working with information systems, that you kind of there is the technical side of things, right? And being in an IT program, we do look at that a lot. And I think it's important to be astute with the technology. And just because you're gaming, right, or just because you're on social media or whatever you do in your life, and you do Facebook a lot, like my wife might be able to up Facebook me, but she has no clue what I'm talking about when I talk about like a CPU and the gigahertz or whatever. But she's learning, okay? And because she's going through this process of learning it right now, I'm seeing this like all these little aha moments that are happening. And if you can empower yourself to really understand how the technology works and then apply it to the human aspect, that's where the power is unlocked for me. Because technology, going back to the Google thing, is not necessarily a good or an evil. It's all in the usage and how it's applied. So it can be great for both, right? And then Skynet rises and knocks us all down, right? All right, folks. That's all I have for the lecture on this chapter, so I'm going to stop the video right now. So this video ends here.